This is a presentation of Northeast Streaming Sports.
If you like the sweet science, get ready to talk boxing on the Gloved Fist podcast with top boxing writers Frank Lotierzo and Jack Hirsch. Frank, a former amateur boxer out of Philadelphia, writes for NY Fights and can be seen on the Boxing Channel. Jack, an amateur boxer who competed in the New York Golden Gloves, was a 6-term president of the Boxing Writers Association. And now, here's Frank Lotierzo and Jack Hirsch.
And we're back. Welcome to Glove Fist, the best listen and learn boxing show out there. My name is Frank Lotierzo, former fighter, part-time writer, full-time advocate, and I am joined by 6-term BWA president, Mr. Jack Hirsch. And boy, we have a show for you. I wonder what we're going to talk about, Jack, tonight. I wonder what the buzz is tonight.
Well, I'm going to tell you, there's a lot going on in the boxing world, but we have to mention world affairs very briefly. I mean, as excited as we are about the sport of boxing, as much as we love it, and that's why people are tuned into our show, and I could talk to you all day about boxing, Frank. What's going on in Ukraine is very much on our mind. But we do a show like this. It does serve a purpose in that it gives us a little bit of a distraction from what's going on, in world affairs, even though it's on our mind, all the time. I'm sure you feel the same way.
Jack, I have to admit, I am just taken by the Klitschko's, Usyk, and Lomachenko. These are guys, at least I know the Klitschko's combined are worth close to $100 million. They could go anywhere and sit on the beach and live out the rest of their lives comfortably, and they chose to fight to defend their country. And a lot of people got on both of them because they felt when they fought, they didn't show up like they're willing to die, and boxing was more of a sport. It wasn't a way of life. Well, I'll tell you what, they're right. But they talk about football being a war and a fight being a war. No, that's not war. There are rules and referees and officials. In war, it's not over until you're dead. And they're willing to pay the ultimate price. So I have the ultimate respect for them. And speaking of inspiration, Saturday, my future father-in-law died. He was 91 years old. That's why I had to come back from Florida. He was 91 years old. 2 days before he had a ruptured aorta. 2 days before that, Jack, this man was on the ski slopes skiing. He lived life to the fullest. And I'll tell you what an inspiration he was. A big sports fan, not much of a boxing fan, but a big sports fan. And up until the last 10 days of his life, he was playing tennis, he was golfing, he was skiing, and he was cutting his own lawn. So I'll kick it back to you, Jack, but I'll tell you what, the Klitschko's and Mr. Sabia are my inspirations this week.
Well, I'm sure most adults, if they were given a contract to sign up to live to be 91 and have a quality life, until the last couple of days, they would sign that contract in the snap of a finger. So it sounds like your future father-in-law was a terrific guy. And our condolences and all the listeners' condolences.
Thanks, Joe.
And all our prayers, for all the brave people in Ukraine.
And the same for Jack, the same thing for the Klitschko's before we get to the boxing.
Yeah.
There are reports that there are mercenaries going to Ukraine looking to take out the big name people, and Zelensky, the president, and the Klitschko's were on there. So I just hope those 4 fighters and everybody makes it out of there. But we kind of feel like we know the Klitschko's, and I would like this. I hope everything works out for them. They never disgraced the sport. They were always in shape. They never badmouth anybody, and they won and lost with class.
Exactly. My sentiments perfectly. But now, speaking of boxing, the big talk over the weekend, and people are still talking about it, was Josh Taylor's split decision over Jack Catterall. Very controversial decision, Frank. How did you see that fight?
Jack, I had Catterall winning the fight by a point. Before they announced the decision, I thought Catterall was going to get the decision. However, I wasn't totally shocked. I didn't think it was as one-sided as everyone thought. I think he made Taylor look bad. He confused him. Taylor is usually good, I think, fighting outside. His game plan was bad. He didn't throw his jab enough. He didn't move his head enough. And I think that Taylor's corner kind of let him down. I didn't hear too much advice they were giving him. I think it was a matter of styles. I don't like that Taylor said he didn't have trouble making weight. Now he's sort of blaming the weight for a bad showing. However, it's nowhere near the worst decision I've seen. I think Catterall won. I could be off by a point. If I change on one round, I have it 3 points for Catterall. That's about fair. The problem is the one judge had it 3 points for Taylor. He should never watch boxing or score boxing again.
Well, didn't have a chance to see the fight live. I had an obligation. I watched it on tape delay when I knew the result and I knew there was a big controversy over the decision. And that's not the way to score a fight, Frank. You've said it plenty of times. I've said it plenty of times because I already had preconceived notions that Catterall won the fight and he was robbed of the decision. So I tried to be as objective as I could, knowing basically what went on. And I had Catterall up by 3 points. And
that's 7-5 with the knockdown. That's 3 points.
Right, exactly. And my beef with Catterall was this. He didn't close the show in the later rounds. I mean, you want to see a fighter close the show. It's kind of in a way like the first Golovkin-Canelo fight. Most people think Golovkin won that fight, but Triple G didn't close the show in the later rounds.
He didn't. He lost last 3 rounds at least.
He allowed Canelo to get it within range where it could have been taken away from him, and it was. And that's what I think happened in this fight to a degree as well. Catterall, even though the punch stat numbers were, clearly in his favor, he didn't close the show. Let me tell you, Carl Frampton, they talked to him after the fight. And Carl Frampton thought it was a terrible decision. And that's kind of revealing in a way. I actually had lunch, believe it or not, with Josh Taylor when he was a young fighter on the way up and he was fighting in the Barclays Center because I'm friends with Barry McGuigan. I was doing a story on the McGuigans, and they had Carl Frampton was fighting Leo Santa Cruz. He was there with Josh Taylor and another fighter, Conrad Cummings, and Barry's son, Shane McGuigan. And you could tell they were good friends, Carl Frampton, Josh Taylor. And Carl Frampton's even going to Josh Taylor's wedding. And he said when he was interviewed, I hope I'm still invited to the wedding, but I got to be honest about it. It was a lousy decision. I wouldn't go that far. I thought it was a wrong decision. That's how I'm going to classify it. I won't even say a lousy decision, a wrong decision. Catterall.
How about a hometown decision?
I wouldn't even say a hometown decision. I wouldn't go. I just think an incorrect decision. I thought Catterall should have gotten the decision. I don't think it's outrageous. In other words, I think Catterall built up enough of a cushion that even though Taylor cut into his margin, he had enough of a cushion to, be given the decision. And he
had the knockdown.
Yeah, but he didn't close the show.
No, he left the door open.
At least keep it on even terms in the later rounds. Don't let the guy cut into your big lead.
Let me throw this out to you, Jack. There are 2 guys who hold an opinion who I don't know personally, but they're public figures, and I value their opinion. However, Sometimes I think their agenda comes into play, and I think sometimes they get caught up and they want to be bigger than the screen. Teddy Atlas and Andre Ward both had Taylor winning that fight. Now, when I see that, what stands out to me is, one, both respected guys. Nobody can say they don't know what they're watching. Number two, they're both American and their heart wasn't in it. And I know that the Brits and the Scots, that's a rivalry. And the fact that the wrong guy perceived got the decision, I think that's why there's such an outrage over it. I don't think they'll fight again. Let me say this too. I think you picked Taylor as I did last week when we discussed it.
I didn't see enough of Catterall.
Right. Okay.
I mean, how can you have picked against him unless you saw a lot of Catterall?
But I went back and watched some of Catterall's fights, and I talked to another guy whose opinion I value, and we kicked it around. And I got to tell you, he fought a great fight and was much better than I anticipated. His punches were tighter and more concise and compact. The fights I saw, his last couple of fights leading up to this fight, he was wide open. I thought Taylor would see everything and either touch him first or get inside. And I have to say, Catterall, I mean, that was his night. So in a way, it is kind of a shame he's not getting the glory. I never saw him fight better. And at the same time, I never saw Taylor more out of sorts, whining to the referee, no head movement, walking in with his hands stagnant and static. I mean, that's not the guy that beat Ramirez and Prograis. I don't know what happened, and I will just say this. He said he's going up to welterweight. I wish him well. I hope he's managed well and he picks the right spots, but as long as that current crop is there, not getting the title.
Nowhere for him to go, Josh Taylor, at welterweight. He should stay at junior welterweight unless he's having a lot of trouble making the weight. I'm going to tell you why there's nowhere to go, Frank. He's promoted by Top Rank.
Right.
Great promotional entity, but at welterweight, they couldn't get Terrence Crawford a big fight, okay? A major fight, I'm talking about, a mega fight. So that's why Terrence Crawford left. So Josh Taylor's going to have the same problem. The PBC is not going to deal with Josh Taylor. They're not going to let him fight the Spence Ugas winner.
I'm going to tell you why I disagree. Because Taylor has a big name and a following, and Spence or Ugas or any of the guys at the top don't fear him. They would fight him because it's a payday, and I don't think they think in their mind that they would risk winning. So he has a better shot to get a big fight at welterweight probably than Terrence Crawford.
And I'm going to throw something at you, and these words are harsh, but Taylor might be entering the category of damaged goods. Now, he's not close to that yet, okay? Not close to that yet. Keep in mind, he's 31 years old. You mentioned his great performances with Baranchak, Prograis, Ramirez, but chances are he peaked. That was him at his very best, and that he slid down. And it's a certain point a fighter slips and can never get back to what he was. And we were kind of seeing that at this fight against Catterall, because Catterall didn't look like a world beater. He looked like a cutie in there. You know, a cutie, the shoulder roll. He was in camp with Mayweather, a very competent pro. Taylor won the fight on heart as much as anything else because he had a will. He kept driving forward. He kept fighting hard the whole 12 rounds, where Catterall kind of picked his spots in the lane.
Right. He had no answers, but he kept pushing it, forcing it.
Pushing the issue. And before this fight, for example, had you told me Josh Taylor would be fighting Teofimo Lopez is moving up. Let's say they fought at 142. Lopez is promoted by Top Rank. I would have picked Josh Taylor absolutely to beat Teofimo. After this performance, I think Teofimo at the top of his game could knock Josh Taylor out.
I would still take Taylor. I think a lot of it, Jack, was an off night, a difficult style. I would take Taylor. I think he can grow and get better from this.
It was a homecoming fight, Frank. If Taylor,
I know, but I think Jackie was a 13-1 favorite. I think he looked past the guy.
Oh, not when you're returning. When you're returning home, the big homecoming fight, you're in top shape. You want to be at your best. That's showtime for
Jack, but you can't be up for every fight. Nobody's done that. How many times was Frazier as good as Ali? Is the first Ali fight, or Leonard or Duran as good as he was the first Leonard fight? He can't be up for every fight. He fought
the big ones you are, and that was a big one because it was homecoming. It was if he was fighting.
I still think he had a hard time getting up for the opponent. I really do.
If he was fighting Catterall, let's say in Las Vegas, I can understand what you're saying, but not when he's fighting him at home.
Jack, if they were to fight again, who would you pick if they fought at 140? Did Catterall convince you he's the better fighter? He didn't convince me of that.
Does Taylor have trouble making weight? If Taylor has trouble making weight, I said at 140. I think Catterall would edge him out. And I'm going to tell you why. There's a certain psychology with judges when one fighter seems to get a little bit ripped off in one fight, they lean backwards. You know what Lennox Lewis said? He said in the second Holyfield fight, the judges were slanted to me. Even though he thought he won the fight anyway, they were slanted more to me because I was given some pity over the decision in the first fights. They leaned over backwards and the scoring was too wide in my favor. It's like overcompensating. It's like you're a big basketball fan, Frank. It's like a referee commits a foul. He questions whether he was right.
He makes a makeup call.
He evens it up. Yeah, I'm going on that theory.
I'm going to tell you why I would take Taylor. And I know he was under pressure fighting at home. I understand that. I still think he looked past the opponent. But here's why I'll take Taylor. If they fought again, I believe that he would be much better, much more prepared, more focused. And there are things he could do that he left on the table in that last fight where I don't think Catterall can fight any better or have a better night. And he barely eked it out that night. I would take Taylor if they had a rematch. I don't think they will, but I would pick him in a rematch.
The only thing Catterall could do is be maybe a little better conditioned if possible and have put out a little more in the later
If he works
rounds.
more, that works in Taylor's favor, though.
Works a little more in the later rounds. But, I don't think it's going to take place because Taylor is coming at home. Let's see a comment. Taylor admitted the pressure fighting at home for the first time in 3 years got to him. He's an edgy and emotional guy. Yes, Frank, he was overconfident that he'd handle Catterall easily. Let me tell you something, okay? Central Scott, who came in with the comment. Josh Taylor wrote a column. He was quoted word for word in Boxing News, a guest column right before the fight. He made it clear that Catterall was a massive threat. He wasn't taking him lightly. And I know people say, well, fighters say it anyway. Then don't say it. Don't say it.
But Jack, they do. They don't want to give the other guy anything to feed off of. How many times do we hear? Every time I watch the game with the Miami Dolphins, the Redskins, or the Patriots, I hear Shula, Gibbs, and Belichick talk about they're playing the 60 Packers or the 70 Steelers, and they could be playing a 2-14 team. You don't want to give the other guy anything unless you're Muhammad Ali or Tyson Fury or Conor McGregor.
I just want to my part closing on this. There's this sports book called Paddy Power. They refunded all the money to the people who bet on Jack Catterall. For some reason, they thought it was so outrageous, the decision, that they felt a need to return the money on ethics. And you rarely see that with sports books. But
not on a split decision. I just don't see that. Again, I think the wrong guy had his hand raised.
Yeah.
I don't see that. And Jack, maybe next week we could talk about some of the worst decisions we've seen. And is this one of them? I think the Pacquiao-Bradley first fight was way worse of a decision than this.
We agree. We're on the same page, Frank, here. We both think if we were both judges, we both would have scored for Catterall, assuming my score was the same in lifetime. but it wasn't outrageous. Okay. It
Okay.
wasn't like, oh, what a robbery. You know, he got ripped off. It was, you know, we think it was an incorrect decision.
I was a little surprised when I saw the reaction and the outrage over the decision.
Yeah. Okay. There were other fights, Frank. There were a bunch of fights over the weekend that got lost in the shuffle here. Lawrence Okoli defended his version of the cruiserweight title, winning a unanimous decision by a wide margin over Poland's Michael Sizlaki. He knocked him down along the way. Okoli remains unbeaten. I have to say something about the referee in that fight, Michael Alexander. It was a rabbit punching fest. Both guys kept hitting one another behind the head all fight, and all he did was issue a couple of warnings about it. It was dangerous. It was outrageous. I sometimes think, Frank, a commissioner should be allowed to jump on the ring apron and call the referee over and say, stop the rabbit punching. Do you think, would you ever be for this, if a referee has lost total control of a fight? I'm just throwing this at you as an idea, nothing more. Do you think a commissioner would be out of line to replace a referee during a fight if he's lost total control of the fight with one of the other alternate referees at ringside?
You know, that's not a bad idea. I want to see the referee do his job and officiate the fight. I don't want to think about him, and I don't want him to be part of the action. And I didn't see the fight you're talking about with Okoli, but it seems that the refs had a bad weekend, and that has to change because they have these guys' lives in their hands, their careers, and the whole bit. And rabbit punching is very dangerous.
Yeah.
Again, I didn't see the fight, but I don't like referees that are too touchy. I like them to let the fighters work, but I don't want to see rabbit punching. I don't want to see excessive holding.
Rabbit punching is the worst, Frank. Rabbit punching is so dangerous. You know, I understand a referee could have an off night, allow a little too much holding, a little too much this or that. No excuse not to put a stop to rabbit punching. I mean, I was always upset over the Muhammad Ali Chuck Wepner fight with referee Tony Perez allowing Wepner to whack behind the head and not putting a stop to it. Okay, and in
fact, Ali took matters in his own hands and did it back.
But yeah. And
that's not good. I know Okoli's Joshua's guy, so he's going to get some name recognition. Who knows? The way Canelo's going, maybe we'll see him in with Canelo one day.
Yeah.
And speaking of which, before we go, I do want to touch on one thing about Bivol and Canelo because it looks like the 2-fight package is signed. He's going to fight Bivol in May of this year, and then in September, he's going to have the 3rd fight with Golovkin.
I'm a little more intrigued than I was, Frank, talking to you a week ago about Canelo and Bivol. Not so much because I've reassessed Bivol and I'm thinking, oh, he's a lot better than I thought he was. He's a very good fighter, very good fighter. Something about Canelo tells me there's slippage there, Frank. And Bivol is going to fight Canelo the same way that Caleb Plant did. And
right.
Plant just didn't
and Saunders, he's going to move.
And Plant doesn't have the talent quite on the level of Bivol. Bivol might be able to win 2 or 3 of those rounds that Plant couldn't.
Jack, it's a tougher fight than people think.
Upsetting Canelo.
It's a tougher fight than people think because of the style, because of Bivol's size. But here's my issue about the fight. It has me not livid, but I'm getting there. I understand that they haven't set the weight yet, and they're going to fight between 68 and 75.
Then how is that a light heavyweight title bout?
Exactly. And I've been defending Canelo to a degree, but I'm sorry. Bivol was 179 in his pro debut. He was 174 and a half in his last fight. Bivol is not a junior middleweight. We don't know what he looks like at 170 or 68 or 69 or 71. If Canelo wants to beat the light heavyweight champion, do what Joey Maxim tried to do. Do what a plethora of others have tried to do. Dick Tiger, name them. They've all done it. I don't want to see a catch weight, Canelo. Fight the man at his best.
Listen, that's ridiculous with all the weight classes to ask for a catch weight.
How come he didn't ask for a catch weight with Kovalev, because he knew he was shot and he didn't need it.
Canelo is a bit of a wimp doing such a thing like that. If we have a pound for pound wimp category and Canelo insists Bivol gets under the light heavyweight limit and he claims he's the light heavyweight champion if he beats Bivol, that's just plain wrong.
Jack, that's good. That again, I've been defending Canelo lately, but I'll tell you what, if he pulls his shenanigans and Bivol has to make a weight, then guess what? He's not getting all the credit in the world if he wins that fight. Right. People don't understand. Maybe the people watching us do, but they don't understand that how much making the weight can alter the outcome of a fighter, and it takes away the strength that the bigger guy has. It takes away his advantage. So what is the big deal if I beat a light heavyweight when he's a junior, when he's a super middleweight? I don't like it. I hope Canelo proves me wrong, but if there's a contract weight that's not 175, I am going to be very sour on Canelo.
How can they recognize that as a light heavyweight championship?
Because they can do whatever they want, Jack, and there's nobody to stop them.
What gets me. Listen, and that's what gets me. All the sanctioning bodies, they saying no fights in Russia. They're all united, like they're all coming together. But it's, and I'm sure they're concerned what's going on in Ukraine. I'm not saying that they're not.
Right.
But their conduct is a facade a lot of the times. It's just like hypocritical,
I can't stand catchweight fights.
No, listen, if a title isn't on the line, that's fine.
And again, no title on the line. I'm good with that. But you're not taking Bivol's title if he can't be a light heavyweight. We don't know what he looks like at 171. No, I want Bivol to come in to be able to come in up to 175, or it just doesn't count. And Canelo is just being more Mayweather than I thought.
Sure. I just want to quickly scan, a few other fights that took place are worth mentioning. In a super featherweight, WBA super featherweight eliminator, late sub Hector Garcia defeated Brooklyn's unbeaten until that fight, Chris Colbert. And Chris Colbert, very talkative, flashy kid, but he kind of got his comeuppance in this fight and lost widely on points. Remember Gilberto Rigondeaux? At one point, he was one of the top fighters pound for pound in the world.
I thought he was. I didn't have a problem with that. What's he, 50 now?
One of the amateur fighters in history, Frank. Gold medalist and all. He lost on a very tight unanimous decision, one point on all the cards.
And he got dropped.
Vincent Astrolabio. It was a close fight. And Rigondeaux, a lot of observers thought he won. It was his opponent's aggression that I guess, swayed the judges more than Rigondeaux's sharp boxing. One of the Russell brothers, Gary Antoine Russell, it's hard to tell the Russell brothers apart. He stopped Victor Postal in the 10th round. Postal, former champion, former belt holder, has been in with some big names.
Boy, there's a guy that has fought everybody and has never backed down from any tough fight. And he had the issue with Ukraine on his mind because I believe his wife and 2 kids are there. So he had to carry that in the ring with him too.
Yeah, they stopped the fight with seconds to go. Postal's gotten to the point in his career now. I think we can both agree he's a gatekeeper.
Yes.
And at this point in his career. Fernando Martinez upset longtime IBF super flyweight champion Jerwin Ancajas by a decision. Martinez clearly won. Now, an interesting name here. Robozy Ramirez, who beat Shakur Stevenson out for the gold medal in the Olympics. He looked impressive, stopping Eric Donovan in 3 rounds on the Taylor Cottrell undercard. Now, you would think because Ramirez beat Shakur Stevenson in the finals of the Olympics, that's a natural fight. But as you remember, Ramirez shocked all of us by losing his pro debut. It made no sense. A great touted amateur gold medalist loses to a no-name in his pro debut.
That's amazing. I remember that now.
He avenged the loss later on, and he hasn't lost since, and he's looked fairly impressive.
Speaking of things I'm remembering, Central Scott said he talked about the rehydration clause in the Canelo fight. I forgot about that. And Joe Bergman says Pistol is 30 or 38. I didn't realize it's quite that old. I thought he was 36.
You're always a gatekeeper at this point. And upcoming this week, I mean, Jose Ramirez, since we talked about Josh Taylor, who Josh Taylor beat in a close decision in a big fight.
The knockdowns were the difference. 2 knockdowns.
Right. Exactly. I thought the knockdowns were the difference. He's fighting Jose Pedraza. Pedraza's not a world beater, but he's a good, competent pro. And I'll tell you, if Pedraza comes up big against Ramirez, it makes your man Tank Davis look extra good.
I was thinking that. You're right. Because Tank stopped him and Lomachenko didn't stop him. Right.
And a really great fight's taking place over this weekend. I'm picking an upset. I'm picking J.C. Martinez, a super flyweight title bouts fighting Chocolatito Gonzalez. I'm picking Martinez to edge Gonzalez out. Martinez isn't a heavy favorite, but I like Martinez in the fight. Let me say that. Now,
I don't think that's a reach, Jack. Martinez is, the Chocolatito's had so many wars. He throws so many punches. Every fight is a war. I could see that.
Let me just say something about that fight. It's more than the fight. Ring announcer Dave Diamante had been in a horrific motorcycle accident, not for the first time in a motorcycle accident. Dave lives life fearlessly, but he was banged up. He fractured 4 vertebrae in his spine. It was touch and go for a little while whether he was going to walk again. He had to teach himself to walk again. He's coming back to resume his ring announcing duties for that fight.
Good for how long was the accident?
The accident was it was like a couple of months ago or so. And he's making a comeback. He's showing tremendous
Good for him.
determination. And I'm ecstatic that Dave's going to come back. I don't know, can he climb the steps because he's in a lot of pain. To keep climbing into the ring up and down, those steps. And those steps scare me, Frank. Even though I was an amateur boxer, I hadn't climbed the steps for a while, and I had to go in the ring once. And I'm looking at those steps thinking, I could fall down from here. I just want to slide down, sit on the ring apron and slide off.
When I fought, the steps were the least of my worries, Jack. I was worried about the other guy.
Yeah. Let's go, let's talk about anniversary fight a little bit. February 25th, 1964. Cassius Clay, Sonny Liston, one of the most famous fights in boxing history.
That's the day it all changed. Jack, that is the fight. If it wasn't for that fight, I would not be sitting here with you. And I'll tell you why. I remember that night, and this is how big the fight was. On the 6 o'clock news, they did a preview of the upcoming championship fight between Sonny Liston and Cassius Clay, and they talked about how Liston had maybe the best jab in heavyweight history, but Clay may be the fastest. And I was so taken by that fight and by Cassius Clay's personality, the way he was going off. If he beats me, I'll kiss his feet in the ring and take the next jet out of the country and won't come back for 30 days. I was so taken by that. I said to my father, I said, look, I said, you got to tell me who won the fight. He goes, tomorrow morning, I'll tell you. Well, that night, he came in to check on my brother and I before him and my mom went to bed, and I was awake. And I said, Dad, who won the fight? He says, you're not going to believe it. He goes, Cassius Clay won the fight. It's a big upset. I'll tell you about it tomorrow morning. From that moment on, I was obsessed with boxing.
I remember just with that fight, being in elementary school and kids talking about it. And I hadn't heard much about boxing before. Who do you think's going to win? Sonny Liston to Cassius Clay. And the other kids were going for Cassius Clay. And, of course, I went for Sonny Liston. But I remember this Cassius Clay just being a happy-go-lucky braggart, a poet. If you want to lose your money, bet on Sonny.
Right.
On and on and on. And it's as hard as this is, Frank, to comprehend, that was considered one of the greatest upsets in sports history.
Yeah, he was 8-1.
Yeah. It was, that's hard to believe on reflection, okay? And a lot of people wouldn't accept it. I mean, let alone thinking the second fight was fixed. And we're going to talk about the second fight in the future, but today we're talking a little bit about the first
Jack, think
fight.
about this.
People still think the first fight was fixed, some people.
No. Liston was not holding back in the 5th round when Clay couldn't see. Think about this. Going into that fight, there were many respected boxing guys who felt head-to-head Sonny Liston may be the greatest heavyweight champ of all time, and nobody thought Cassius Clay was anything but a happy-go-lucky, good-looking kid from the amateurs who got a title fight. He'll get beat in a couple years. He won't be in boxing. Nobody thought at that time that there was a chance that Cassius Clay could go on to be one of the greatest heavyweights of all time. And Jack, to this day, I've always felt that Ali was troubled by guys that jabbed. Liston has one of the best jabs ever, and Ali, Cassius Clay, then clearly peppered him and out-jabbed him that night, picked him apart, went on the offense, used the ring, and I happen to be in a minority, but I happen to think that may have been Ali's most impressive fight of the 60s, even more than Cleveland Williams because of the caliber of the opponent. Williams had a bullet in him by then. He was shot. It was just a payday. But Ali couldn't have met Liston at a higher point in Liston's career. He had demolished the top 4 heavyweights in front of him. People don't realize that Clay was the 5th ranked heavyweight and talked himself into the fight. And the rest is history.
I'm going to tell you, Frank, you make a great, great point. When you talk about the greatest performances of Ali's career, people tend to point to the Cleveland Williams fight because Ali looked beautiful in that fight, moving around. But you got to consider what's in front of him.
Right.
That Liston who Ali Cassius Clay beat at the time, maybe conceivably could have beaten any other heavyweight in history that night, conceivably to that point in time.
Right.
Up to 1964. Okay. It would have been very difficult for Marciano, Joe Louis, Jack Dempsey to survive the Liston attack. Could they? It's possible. That's a debate for another time. But the fury that Liston came at Clay with, and who else could have circled the ring the way Clay did?
Ali Clay punched to the body that night too.
When I think of the 2 greatest performances of Ali's career, I don't think of Cleveland Williams. That's the fight I enjoy watching the most.
Right.
Cleveland Williams, because it was a thing of beauty watching Ali in the ring. But his 2 greatest performances, I thought, were the first Liston fight and, believe it or not, the Ernie Terrell fight, in which Terrell was a great fight in his own right. Not an all-time great, but a great fighter. And he was in top form for that fight. That was the best of Ernie Terrell against Ali. And Ali,
another guy that had a great jab that couldn't do nothing with Ali.
Right, and he threw that jab, and Ali was brilliant against Terrell the way he boxed. But because of all this talk with the "what's my name" nonsense, Ali, in a sense, like I've said in the past, robbed himself, of a little bit of the glory.
Ali took it to his grave, but every biography I read on Ali, he said the only time he was scared going into the ring was the first fight with Liston. He said Liston was the only guy that scared him. That's why he did all the antics by harassing him. He felt that he had to get to Liston somehow. But the sad part is Liston is remembered for the 2 fights with Ali, and it's a shame because I think Liston may be one of the best boxer punchers in history after Joe Louis. And I have Liston in the all-time top 5, Jack. I think he was that good. I just think it's his misfortune that he came along during the Ali era. Ali did that to George Foreman too. If Ali doesn't beat Liston in 64, and you're around then, if he doesn't beat Liston in 64, you could make a case that Liston holds the title till 69 and gets beat by Frazier.
68, and then Joe Frazier Liston would have been on the decline by 68.
And Frazier was on the ascent.
Frazier would have stopped Liston. It would have been similar to Dwight Muhammad Qawi stopping Matthew Saad Muhammad. One guy was finally declining, the other guy was coming up. You know, it would have been a change.
That's actually a good, Jack. That's a very good analogy. I like that. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I totally agree that Frazier stops him, but I think if you want to make the case, that's a very good analogy. But you know, Liston had no respect for Frazier. He thought Frazier was made for him. He said it'll be like shooting fish in a barrel. He tried to get that fight. You know who didn't want that fight? Yank Durham. He knew in 66, 67, Joe wasn't ready.
Let me ask you this, Frank. When the WBA stripped Ali and had an 8-man elimination tournament, and the fighters, I'm just going to mention them, and then I'm going to ask you your opinion, who took part in the tournament. We know Jimmy Ellis won it, but Leotis Martin was in it, Oscar Bonavina, Carl Mildenberger, Floyd Patterson, Jerry Quarry, Ernie Terrell, and Thad Spencer. Had Liston been allowed in the tournament, let's say, instead of Leotis Martin, who was the last man allowed in, they allowed Liston in, does he win the WBA tournament?
I don't think there's a doubt about it.
Yeah.
The two best heavyweights, you can make a case, weren't in it. Frazier wouldn't go in it, and they didn't invite Liston. But I'm telling in 67, Jack, because of styles, if you break those other guys up with Liston, think about this. Say Ellis and Quarry are the two best guys. Quarry has no answer for anybody with a good jab.
Quarry, even an older Liston stops.
Yes,
Quarry.
And Jimmy Ellis just doesn't have the guns to make Liston do anything he doesn't want to do.
But keep this in mind. Jimmy Ellis did last a few rounds under intense pressure against Joe Frazier at Frazier's best. Could Ellis?
That was 3 years later, though. Ellis was more filled out.
An older version of Sonny Liston. A peak Liston destroys Ellis. Let's not kid ourselves. I'm talking about.
I think in 67, 68, the one that beat Henry Clark would beat Jimmy Ellis. So if Liston was in that tournament, Jack, I would have picked Liston, or I think Liston. I was too young at the time, but I think Liston beats everybody in that tournament. Then after that, he just aged.
People tried to duck Liston at that point in his career later on. Speaking of ducking guys, one of the most intriguing, charismatic fighters is our Spotlight Fight of the Week. Why don't you tell us about him?
Aaron the Hawk Pryor fought from 1976 to 1990, 39-1, 35 knockouts, 11-0 in title bouts, 9 knockouts. Pryor was voted the greatest junior welterweight of the 20th century by the AP and was inducted into the IBF Hall of Fame in 96 after retiring in 91.
International Boxing Hall of Fame.
Right.
Yeah. You said IBF.
As we know, Jack, Pryor could have been on that great 76 Olympic team. He lost to Howard Davis twice. They thought that back then, when they would pick the guys to go to the Olympics and when they scored the fights, they wanted the boxers. They felt that Howard Davis matched up better with the foreign fighters than did Pryor. Davis gets the nod. That great team goes on to win 5 gold medals. Pryor turns pro. He is avoided as a lightweight for his first 25 fights. And then he has a conversation with Muhammad Ali. He said, go up 5 pounds. You'll beat all those guys. He gets a fight with Antonio Cervantes, who I believe was 34 at the time. He stops him in 4 rounds the afternoon of the night when Thomas Hearn beat Pepino Cuevas to win the WBA welterweight title. The rest is pretty much history. Pryor went through the division. He's known for his 2 fights with Aguayo. And what can you say about Aaron Pryor? Jack, he had his style. Think about this. The things he could do, I actually made notes on it. Think about throughout boxing history, there have been a plethora of guys who had hand speed and power. Pryor had they could do one or the other. Not many guys had both. Pryor was one of the ones. He had both. He was unconventional. He had a jab that was the power of a welterweight's right hand. He could handle and throw any kind of punch that you threw at him. He was effective attacking and in retreat. He had a good right uppercut, good right hands, bone-jarring power in that right hand. Wasn't much of a hooker unless he was crowding. And here's what I liked about Pryor the most stylistically. Jack, Pryor had an innate sense to figure out if his opponent wanted to box, he went after him and was a hellraiser. And if the guy wanted to trade and fight it out, Pryor would use the ring and go in and out. He had a little Pacquiao in him. He had endless stamina. And I think he's one of the all-time greatest junior welterweights in history.
You know, I had the pleasure of having dinner with Pryor indirectly. What happened, Pryor was in for banquet for Ring 8 New York, along with Tony DeMarco. So here I am, through the niceness of Bob Duffy, who was the president of Ring 8 at the time, and I'm on their board of directors. I'm in a van traveling to the restaurant with Pryor and his wife in the back, and Tony DeMarco and his wife. That's some combination, different eras. DeMarco was a sweet guy. So, you know, we're talking a little bit about boxing, and what stuck to me, I'm sitting in the front with Bob Duffy. I turned to the back with Pryor sitting, and I said, who knows who would have won between you and Floyd Mayweather? And he kind of shrugged, and I thought that was really nice, because his feeling was, he probably thought, yeah, I think I could beat him.
No doubt.
Sure. You know, but like he realizes, Pryor, when you got to that level, anyone could conceivably beat anyone else at that level. But, you know, there's a lot of talk, Frank, and I hear this all the time, and I don't agree with it. As fond as I was of Aaron Pryor, and as much as I liked him through that one evening, you know, to spend with him, Sugar Ray Leonard never ducked Aaron Pryor. Tommy Hearns never ducked Aaron Pryor. It was just, Marvin Hagler certainly didn't. It's absurd. He was a different weight class. But you hear people say it, especially Sugar Ray Leonard. At the time, if you look at the timeline of when they had big fights, it just didn't work out. I mean, when Aaron Pryor became an absolute superstar, okay? That was in November 1982 in Miami, and he had a super fight against a superstar in Alexis Arguello. And right after that, you know, Sugar Ray not long after had the detached retina, and, you know, Pryor had the rematch with Arguello. He won. And then after the rematch with Arguello, due to substance abuse problems, you know.
We never saw his best, right?
No, he had a couple of more fights, and then he lost the fight to Bobby Joe Young, and that was it. He was basically done. It wasn't like he was around where they would meet. Sugar Ray Leonard would have met him in a big mega fight for Mega.
Well, that fight was close to happening, Jack, but that's when Leonard, after the Bruce Spence fight, had to retire because of the detached retina. By the way, Chris, I appreciate you watching, and when you say something cogent, we will acknowledge it. Anyhow.
Now, can I just say something, Frank? Two fighters did avoid Aaron Pryor, but we don't talk
Mancini?
about Boom Boom Mancini. Both guys were from Ohio. It would have been a mega fight.
I'm so glad they didn't fight, Jack.
Well, Mancini wanted no part of Pryor, but let me say maybe his management team, because Mancini had the heart of a lion. Had they told him, we want you to fight Pryor, I think he would have gone through with it. I don't think Mancini would ever say, oh, I want
no. I agree totally. It's a bad matchup for Mancini, though.
And Howard Davis Jr., it would have been a natural, because Howard Davis Jr. beat Pryor twice in the amateurs. I didn't see the fights. I'm not commenting on the decisions. I assume they were fair, you know, because I know Davis was a great, great amateur. One of the best United States.
He was outstanding boxer at the Olympics in '76.
Right. So I'm assuming the decisions were just, you know, but, you know, who knows? But it would have been natural, because Pryor passed him as a pro, would have beaten Davis as a pro. Hector Camacho obviously wanted no part of Pryor around that time. So certain guys did duck him, but the big guns, Tommy Hearns and Sugar Ray Leonard, did not duck Pryor. I saw Hearns lose to Pryor. I saw the amateur tape on YouTube.
That's what a lot of people go on. Hearns was a baby in that fight. Yeah. He was very green and skinny, and he wasn't yet the flowered fighter that he went on to be. But
I don't think Pryor beats either guy as a
no.
Not Leonard. I think he has a better chance against Hearns. Because
I disagree. I think he has a much worse chance against Hearns. How's he beat him, Jack? He can't get inside, and trying to get inside, he'll get his head taken off. At least Leonard, he can go some rounds at Leonard and make Leonard work and maybe make him look bad for a little while. He has no way to beat Hearns. He can't beat him going to him, and he can't go away from him.
He had a crazy, unconventional style.
Oh, he was very hard to fight, and he had endless stamina that was already said. He had an unbelievable motor. He was knocked down a few times, but he wasn't hurt. He was off balance. Let's address another thing, Jack, regarding Pryor. A lot of people like to point to the black bottle in the 13th round of the Aguayo fight. I've been around too many guys that have done all kind of performance-enhancing drugs. I don't think anything gives you a boost quite that quick. I think it's a non-entity. I don't think there's any doubt about it. He beat Aguayo fair and square. And if you look at it, they fought a second time 10 months later, and it was a rerun.
No,
neither have I, Jack. I saw him off Joe. I saw him off balance. I never saw him hurt.
Yeah, Pryor was knocked down a couple of times in certain fights, while he was champion too. But they were the type of knockdowns because he was so hyper. I kind of remember Juan Johnson, a fighter.
Juan Johnson, yeah, he was a Kronk guy.
Yeah. And
an Oriental guy knocked him down too. I forget his name. In fact, I'll tell you as you're talking. I have his record right here. I think it was Akio Kamada.
Yeah.
Knocked him down, and then Pryor stopped him in the 6th round.
Yeah, and when Pryor won his title finally against the great Antonio Cervantes, but Cervantes was ready to be taken. And Pryor knocked him down in 4 rounds. It would have been an interesting fight, Frank, that could have taken place at some point. They were around the same time. I don't
Duran
when demanding it. No, not. Well, of course, that would have been interesting. Benitez. Pryor's hyper style of the Arguello fight. Could a peak Benitez have tamed Pryor? Just, at
140, that would have been a hell of a fight. The problem is, when Pryor gets the title, it's 1980. By 1980, Benitez is a junior middleweight, so there was never a chance that was going to happen. I'll tell you a fight I'd like to see, and some people may not think much of it, but I'm not sure who I'd pick. I would like to see the best Terrence Crawford at 140 fight Pryor.
Yeah, I would think at some point Terrence Crawford's yet to have his coming out party because he hasn't been in with a great fighter.
The closest was Porter.
Yeah, right. And he didn't assume control of that fight in reality until maybe the round before the knockdown. He wasn't even that far ahead at that point.
I think it was up 5-4.
Yeah, exactly. So if it was over 15 rounds, maybe Crawford withstands everything, then starts winning some of the middle rounds and then takes over late. Maybe Pryor's whirlwind attack has Crawford on the defensive a good part of the fight. And by the time, the later rounds, it's a question of Crawford cutting into a lead. Maybe that's an exciting version of a Josh Taylor, Jack Hadrow fight. And then when it's over, Crawford maybe gets the decision, but most people think that Pryor wins. I don't think
that Pryor could stop Crawford. I don't think Crawford would stop him either, but I would lean towards Crawford, I think, because I just think Crawford is a water fighter, and he has more guns, and he has more ways and means to win. Again, I don't think we've seen Crawford's best yet. I would lean towards Crawford. I'd love to see it. And as someone said here, another thing we didn't touch on, let's be honest. Pryor was too big for Aguayo. Aguayo started at 126. Now he's fighting at 140 against the best guy in the division because if you recall, Aguayo did beat Billy Costello, who had the title. If anybody else that night.
That's after he lost the prior fights. He beat Billy Costello.
Right. But what I'm saying is, Jack, Aguayo probably wins the 140-pound title against somebody else, not Pryor, because he almost beat Pryor.
Yeah, the Costello-Aguayo fight, as I recall, Costello
86.
dominated the whole fight, and then Aguayo hit him one shot and followed up. It was that type of fight, too. You mentioned Billy Costello. There's so many forgotten fighters like that, where around that time you just don't hear their names, being mentioned.
Because the stars dominated. You're right.
Yeah.
But prior, Jack, think about this. Alexis Aguayo was one of those guys that a boxer puncher, he did everything by the book. I've often thought that what was going through his mind when Pryor was catching him with some of the shots he was, and thinking to myself, this guy, he does everything the way it's not supposed to be done, but yet I can't stop him. I think Aguayo was so befuddled by Pryor's erratic style and unorthodoxness. I don't think he really.
Not Frank, because Aguayo was hitting him some terrific shots.
Oh no, he hit him, Jack. But he was also getting hit more than he was ever hit before, by Pryor's counters and his spurts. Remember, Pryor was not a bell. Some people think he's a bell-to-bell attacker like a Frazier. He wasn't. Pryor was a little bit more like Pacquiao, where he would press sometimes. Well, Pacquiao pressed all the time. Pryor would press in spurts when he thought the other guy was looking to get set or get a breather. And that right hand that Pryor hit Aguayo with, or Aguayo hit Pryor with in the 13th round, that thing was heard around the world. Remember that thud? And Pryor's head went boom back, and he came right back.
Yeah, I mean, certain of the fights we could speculate how Pryor would have done. I can't say with any strong degree of conviction how certain of his fights would have turned out with other junior welterweights. Let's say he fought Julio Cesar Chavez at Chavez's peak, at his best. And they were at junior welterweight, both at their very best.
But I don't think that was Chavez's best weight.
Okay,
140.
but let's say it was close to 140. You could talk about a catch weight where both guys only a few pounds difference. I mean,
Pryor beats him.
A Meldrick Taylor, who is a buzzsaw at his very best. Does Pryor really beat him?
I think Pryor beats him at 135 or 140, yes.
135. He doesn't beat Pernell Whitaker at 135.
No, Whitaker has a style. No, I would take Whitaker over Pryor at 135, but I'll tell you what, I'd love to see it. It goes the distance, and Whitaker would not look great beating him because his style would actually bother Whitaker because of the in and out, up and down, all around. Whitaker was not at his best when he had to chase. He could do it, but he never had to do it against somebody like Pryor.
I could see Pryor, beating Roberto Duran in let's say a 12-round fight. You know how hyper Pryor was in the ring, punches coming from every angle. I could see that, but who knows?
I would pick Duran to beat Pryor at any weight 35 on up. Again, I think it's a style because I think Duran's the one guy who could kind of smother Pryor's aggression, and I know that Pryor is not going to knock him out. And Jack, by the way, what does that shirt say?
Smoking Joe Frazier.
I want that.
I got.
Where'd you get that?
I was walking a while ago. I'm in Dick's Sporting Goods, and they have some shirts on the rack, and I go, what? Like throwback shirts. I got a shirt of Smoking Joe Frazier, one on Jack Johnson. Believe it or not. So how can I not, pick it up, Smoking Joe Frazier?
Oh, I was looking as we were talking.
I would have bought.
And I was going to really rip into you because I thought it said smoking and not smoking, and it's smoking. There's no G.
Yeah.
I like that shirt, Jack.
You're right on that.
If you ever see that again, pick me up one, and I'll send you the money.
Absolutely. Yeah. Smoking Joe. Okay, Frank. Great show here. Any closing thoughts before next week? Before we meet again?
I'm interested in the Ramirez fight. I want to watch Chocolatito. Jack, I just hope, and again, we don't do politics, but I'll tell you what, I hope when we get together this time next week that the Klitschko brothers, Usyk, and Lomachenko are still with us, because I really fear what's going on, and those guys are targets.
Yeah, prayers for them and everyone else in Ukraine. See you all next week.
Thanks, Jack. Great show.